Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of Teacher Talk with DocRocker. I am always, as your host, is Russ Downey, and with me today is Danton Arlotto of DocRocker Music
Yep.
and solo recording artist and guitarist Nick Rossi. So, Danton, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so well, today we decided to bring Nick on board because, much like some other guests we've had on the show pretty recently, Nick Rossi was one of the last generation of rock and roll after school graduating kids. He was a stupendous student there, fantastic guitar player. He was featured on the rock and roll school's supergroup, which was like an audition based kind of only the best of the best can get in on that kind of thing. And he was one of their top players for a long time. I've had the pleasure of working with him personally as a teacher to student and as a teacher to a fellow teacher. You know, during the later years of his run, he also taught some students to get some teaching experience before going off to college. And now Nick just finished his nursing program at Westchester U. So he's still playing. Of course, he's not performing live for obvious reasons, but, Nick, maybe you could tell us more about what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I just graduated nursing school. Just started working as a registered nurse at Paoli Hospital here in the area, and it's been fun. It's been fun. It's been hard. A little bit of a learning curve, being brand new in the middle of a pandemic, but it's been good. It's been fun. Yeah. More excitingly though, since I finished school, I've had a lot more time to play some guitar. So I've been able to pretty much dive head first back into my recording gig and all that kind of stuff. So I'm having a good time.
And that is very cool. That makes you a perfect candidate for what we want to really get into today. We want to talk about the use of pedals, as guitar players, as guitar students, as guitar teachers. How does it work in the private setting? What are some possibilities? What is some of the jargon and lingo that we can kind of lay out onto the surface for lay people that might not know any better? And then we can kind of get into, maybe possibly using them in schools and how we can maybe kind of rethink the current guitar education scene, at least in the public school setting. So let's just kind of dive right into pedals themselves. What are they? How do they work? What kind of effects can we get? And why do guitar players love collecting these little guys so much?
Well, most pedals, unfortunately, I don't have an example here for you, but the idea of an effects pedal is really pretty simple. Basically, you take your input, plug into your electric guitar, input into the guitar pedal, then another cable comes out of the output, goes into the front of your amp, to keep it simple to start. That's pretty much how they all work. Now, some amplifiers have what's called an effects loop, which puts the effects pedals between the power section and the preamp section. That would be like of a tube amp. So different effects kind of go in different places. It's mostly personal preference, but a lot of guys like to put their drive pedals up in front of the preamp to make that, you push the amp a little harder, you can get a little bit more gain out of a tube amp. And then you put like your wet effects or your modulation effects, which would be your chorus, reverb. There's any number of them now. That's the kind of stuff you'd want to put in your effects loop. It comes after like your dirt and your gain that keeps those effects nice and clean and sparkly and airy. And then you still got your dirt and your brunt up front.
Yeah, so maybe we could break down some of the, because you just gave us a perfect, like, awesome, like an appetizer sample platter at like a high class restaurant. Where like, here's a little bit of everything, and it's everything you can really dream for. So maybe we can kind of get into a little bit more of the specifics. Maybe some of that terminology is not familiar for some of our viewers. So maybe we could talk about drive and gain and what modulation effects and what sort of different examples there are, and then we can maybe and we could get Russ in on this, or we could talk a little bit maybe about specific bands or artists or songs that people could check out, or we could get an idea of what these sort of sounds are like. So let's start with drive and gain. I feel like that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, that's something a lot of guys are very, very particular about. Drive pedals. There's all different kinds of stages, gain staging. You start with a clean tone, basically.
Okay.
And you have like a tube screamer, which is a real light overdrive, almost like a pushed clean sound. It's like you don't even really call it a crunch. It's a little lighter than a crunch. You can move up into into a crunchy kind of setting, and it just kind of gets more and more aggressive and dirty from there up into like your fuzz, your octave fuzz kind of stuff. I don't know. As far as like specific songs to kind of check out. I mean, it's like all across the board. You hear different stages of gain and just about everything you could listen to, you know.
Very cool. Yeah, absolutely. And especially, you know, when you get more into the specific kinds of like rock and metal, the heavier the genre, the more distortion is typically used. And of course,
Right.
we can literally probably do an entire episode just on distortion itself. But this is more
Oh
of like
yeah.
a
Oh
kind of
yeah.
introduction. It's basically that idea of overfeeding the sound through the input processor just enough so that it, you know, literally
It
distorts the
distorts. It's
sound.
distortion. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and that distortion has become such a staple in like a lot of modern rock and heavy guitar playing that, you know, now a lot of pedal makers and guitar manufacturers out there are developing pedals that artificially create that sound for you on purpose instead of by accident. So, you know, the
And they
legend
do a
goes,
really good job of it too. So you can
yeah,
get these really high gain tones that would have been otherwise unattainable by, you know, that they used to like cut slits in the speakers to get a fuzz tone. You know, you
yeah.
can now get these really super distorted tones just out of a little pedal box.
Yeah, an interesting little bit of trivia is that, you know, the legend goes, as far as like rock history goes, that pretty much some unnamed performer was on his way to a gig and hit a major pothole, and out comes the amp from the trunk of the car, and it messed up the speaker in such a way that when he plugged in and played his guitar, it came out distorted. And he thought, oh no, I'm doomed, I'm not going to be able. So he had to still, the show must go on. He did the gig, and people were really blown away by the sound. Like, how did you create that really cool sounding guitar sound? And then sure enough, you know, now you got people that are cutting their speakers on purpose and doing these things like, I want to get that really cool, gritty, distorted sound. And that's, you fast forward 50 or 60 years, and that's where we are now, where not only can amplifiers do that intentionally, but now you could also combine that with pedals. And I think any purist out there in the guitar world would argue that pedals are the way you want to go if you really want to get a really nicely refined distortion sound, as kind of ironic as that sounds. Would you agree with that, Nick?
Well, it depends on where you go. The best place to start, I think, if you ask most guys, is a good tube amp. If you start with a good tube amp, then that's like your platform, and you can put pedals in front of it. Hopefully, like you can get even through a light gain amplifier, if it's a tube amplifier, you get more of the preamp sound. It's a little bit more unique as opposed to plugging into like a solid state, you know, Boss Katana or something. You get a little bit more of a unique tone. As far as high gain amplifiers, there are good high gain, you know, tube amplifiers, and some guys in the metal scene will swear by them too. But the digital stuff is great. The Boss multi effects pedals, they have awesome distortions. The Katana amps get great distorted tones. The Axe effects, what's the other one? The Kemper. Those two are like,
yeah,
that
Axe Effect is kind of like
amazing.
the niche big boy out there right now. That's, you know, very
Kemper's
cool
coming up big too. I think they're bigger overseas. I think they're a European company.
I don't know. Those of you that do know, let us know. You know, post it on the Facebook page, or if you want to put it on a comment. You know, of course, this is going to be on YouTube, so we'll so I'm sure we could possibly get comments and things like that. So yeah, and so this is just getting into like the basics of how much of the guitar's sound is coming through the output, right? You know, through the basic phases of a nice clean tone versus a bit of a crunchy tone versus a fuzzier tone versus a more in the vein of overdrive and distortion. But that's not even considering any of the other multitude of different effects that are out there via pedals. You know, the big buzzword that Nick mentioned before was modulation. What exactly is modulation? What are some different examples of a modulated sound?
Oh, well, that's modulation. I think like the criteria to be modulation is time oriented to some degree. Like even a chorus pedal, they have almost like a waveform. It sounds like some kind of waveform. A tremolo pedal, how it goes like woof, 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 back and forth. It's kind of like a waveform. Delay has a time aspect to it.
Yeah.
Reverb has a time aspect to it.
And even something like a flanger or a phaser, even something like that.
Yeah, I think those are timed. Yeah. And you could definitely, and a lot of times you could just change the velocity at which they change. You know, modulate being pretty much a fancy word for changing over time. You know, and then phasers, you can kind of go ahead.
Phasers and flangers are big. Like there's not like a huge argument, but there's plenty of guys that'll argue either in the effects loop or in the front of the amp. You know, totally different sound, but it comes down to personal preference. But you have guys that'll swear both ways. That there are two big ones that people will use interchangeably. Mostly delay and reverb is almost always in the loop if you have a loop and you're using a distorted tone. But yeah, flangers and phasers, they're like almost a little bit of an exception, but still definitely modulation. There's big multi-effects units that are just modulation. Strymon makes one. I think Boss makes one too. They have like a bunch of different settings on there. You can get like all those pedals wrapped up into one. The cool thing about those is they were never really analog. They've always been digital for the most part, or at least for a long time. So that technology is really good. They sound fantastic.
Cool. Well, there you go, guys. Take notes. You know, he just gave you like a laundry list of like awesome different, you know, perfect examples of like some of the different options that are out there for you. Let's say we had like an aspiring guitar player or even a guitar teacher out there that wanted to kind of get into this and start exploring some different pedals. Are there any like particular recommendations you'd make?
Three. I would give you three to start.
All right.
If you wanted to build a short little pedal board, definitely
get your pens and pencils out, ladies and
definitely
gentlemen.
a drive of any kind. If you want a tube screamer, something light. If you want a fuzz, something real gritty. Or if you want like the Boss SD1 is a really good, like just classic rock distortion kind of tone. So definitely one of those. Whatever your preference is, go to a guitar store, plug a couple in, try them out. Then I would say a delay and a reverb pedal. Delay, analog is always good, but like I said, the digital technology is great too. So you don't have to get too hung up on that. Same with the reverb. There's plenty of great options. Boss has a good option for both delay and reverb. There are some companies that put them together. I think Mad Professor, I think, has one that's a delay and a reverb together. But with those three, you can completely transform the sound of your guitar for not a whole lot of money.
Yeah. Do you have like a ballpark figure of how much someone would look to spend for something like that?
Well, you could probably do it for as cheap as $200 pretty easily.
There you go.
You could also spend upwards of like $500 or $600 if you really wanted to.
Sure, depending on how many options and how great quality
Yeah.
difference you want to have in your sound.
And Danton, I know you mentioned you have a multi-effects unit. They're great too. They really are great.
I do.
Which one do you have?
We could talk. I have a Boss. I think it's a multi like ME 125, if I remember right off the top of my head. Actually, I got it sitting on the floor right over here. I could take a quick look at it. Yeah, the ME 25. I was close. It was off by one number. But yeah, I mean, and if I remember right, it was maybe somewhere like around the $200 price range. I bought it a few years ago when I first wanted to start getting into pedals, because for me, it was the big thing was getting a good guitar collection going first. You know, so I have my trusty Telecaster. I have another Telecaster, and those are like the two big guitars that I use mainly. One of them has humbuckers, one of them has single coils, and we could do a whole different thing on guitar tech maybe in a later.
Yeah. Those are sounds you can't emulate.
Yeah, so you know, and I branched out from there and got like several different guitars for different reasons, you know, different tunings and different styles of playing. I even have a semi-hollow jazz guitar that I got from my guitar teacher when I was in high school. I don't use it very often, but so for me, I collected a bunch of guitars, and then it was like, all right, now that I got like a whole bunch of different tones I can work with, and I just have a really simple Fender combo amp, a Deluxe 90 that I got like real old and real cheap at a local music shop in my hometown growing up, and it just sounds awesome and I love it. So I was like, let me just get like a really simple kind of, and for me, like the big reason I opted for a multi pedal as opposed to like starting to build like a customized pedal board from scratch. I know how much more expensive that can get. Eventually I will want to do that, but for me, the biggest reason I wanted to do it was as a teacher, not so much to use in my own playing, but to use to like explain those kind of things to a student. Like, here's what distortion sounds like. Here's what delay does to your guitar sound. Here's what chorus does. Here's what, and so I figured, let me buy like a kind of like one and all package that has a little bit of everything, and then we can kind of tweak all the things individually. And the ME25 that I picked up, I absolutely love. It has some great sounds. I mean, I use it every day now when I'm practicing. All my guitars go through that before they go into the amp, and the sound that comes out is fantastic. You know, anyone who has seen me play, you know, tune into my Instagram streams. I do practice sessions every week, and I just sit here and play, and that's what it all is. It's whatever guitar I got on my lap is going through the ME25, and then it's coming out of Fender Deluxe 90. And like I said, I like it a lot as a teacher, but we can kind of get into more like, you know, what are some of the different differences of maybe having all of it like in one little thing where you can kind of play with that, as opposed to like if you had like a separate collection, you know, like the term pedal board is a big thing for guitar players, right? They have this whole like where they spend months and months putting this whole thing together and customizing all the different pedals, the order they come together, you know, and they sort of daisy chain the pedals together and create some really, really interesting sounds. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about, you know, what kind of gear you use and how you set it up.
Yeah, I can run you through my rig, like through my head. But I do want to say, so you're exactly right. I was going to mention getting a little intro level kind of, you know, $200 can be a pretty big investment for someone that might be in middle school or high school. You know, I totally get that. It's a good Christmas present. A nice little effects unit it's a fantastic way to get, like, it's all right there. You know, maybe they're not the highest quality effects, but you're going to learn what each different one is. You're going to learn which ones you actually want. And then maybe you can pick 2 or 3, like I said earlier, and you can actually go out and buy them, and then you can get, you know, good quality ones that you actually really like the individual sound of. As far as my rig, so I'm still in the process of building my board. I don't think I've ever had a complete pedal board. I always run out of money because I try to, and then by the time
it's hard, man.
I do. Like I have these huge plans. I had a Boss MS3 like multi-effects stomp pedal that had all these effects in it, and it had 3 loops, so I could put 3 pedals into it also of my own stuff and run MIDI through it, which is a whole other conversation. I ended up selling that. So now I have an orange TH30 head and this old orange 412 cabinet. I'm not sure exactly the model that it is, but I bought it from some guy on Craigslist. The thing sounds amazing. I can't get over how good this cabinet sounds. It's my favorite part of the whole rig. Then I have this pedal board that I actually built myself out of wood. I have Ernie Ball volume pedal, so I can do some swells. That's not a huge necessity, but it's nice to have. It's
definitely good
like
if you want to use it a lot, for sure.
Yeah, and it's a good mute switch. I have a tuner pedal that actually plugs into the volume pedal, so it's on all the time. Then I just volume down and I can tune.
Very nice.
Out of the volume, actually the volume pedals later in the chain. First in the chain is my compressor. I have a BC Opto Stomp compressor. I have, after that is a Chinese clone of a TS808 or a TS9 tube screamer pedal. After that, I have a Nano Muff Pi, I think. It's an Electro Harmonix $40 fuzz pedal. I saw it at Sam Ash. It was $40 used. I was like, yeah, I'll buy it. I don't have a fuzz pedal. I'll give it a shot.
Yeah. Good buy.
Then after that, I have my volume pedal. So the idea there is, you know, you can put your volume pedal at the front or you can put it at the end of your drive. The idea, if you put it after your drive, is that when you bring your volume down, it doesn't affect the tone of the drive pedals. I don't really know if it makes a big difference, but that's how it fits on my board. So that's how I did it.
Yeah, and it definitely gives you a little bit more customization, just that extra little dimension of how you can kind of tweak the sound ever so slightly.
It is a different sound.
Having more of the Ernie Ball and less of your volume.
When you do your swells and stuff, you always have the same amount of gain. You just really get volume the way I have it set up. Where if you have it in the front, then it actually your gain goes up as you bring the volume in. Out of the volume pedal, then I go into the front of my amp, and then in the effects loop, I have a Boss DD500 delay pedal, which is it's their flagship delay pedal. It has 6 or 7 different modes to it. It has like infinite customizability. There's a computer program that I have. I can change all of it on my computer and set up, you know, it has a bunch of different presets. It has tap tempo. It has like any feature you could possibly think of. So I love that. I have a Phase 90 clone that I don't use very much, but it's in there. And I have a Mojo Hand Effects Dewdrop delay pedal, which sounds really good. It's this spring reverb with this weird kind of modulation tacked onto it at the same time. So it's this like real airy kind of reverb sound, but it has the classic spring to it too. So it's pretty interesting. And I have a looper pedal too. I have a Boss RC1
nice.
looper.
So you pretty much have everything you could possibly need. To, especially like a really good like to start, and then you could always add more and more gizmos
Right.
and toys.
I've got the basics. I've got like one of everything.
You have all the basics in spades.
Now I'm just trying to figure out which ones I actually like. Yeah, which that's where the money part comes in, because now I'm just where I could just buy a big multi-effects unit and have all of these options, where now I'm kind of buying and selling and trading pedals. It's the hobby that comes along with it.
Yeah, and you could easily fall down the rabbit hole of that, just like a lot of people do.
Oh, yeah.
Like for me, it happened with me with the guitar collection. It's like, oh, I want to get this one because it's got these kinds of pickups, and this one's got a different body shape, and this one is, it's like next thing you know, you have 9 guitars and a huge mountain of credit card debt. It's like, all right,
I'm in the market for a baritone right now.
Oh, nice! I don't have one of those. The next one I need to buy is a 7-string. Because I have a bunch of stuff that I wrote for 7-string that now I can't really play because I don't have one. But yeah, in due time, once this whole pandemic nightmare fiasco is over, and I'm teaching a little more, and I'm pulling in a little bit more money every month, I'm gonna probably bite the bullet and get one. Especially now that I'm doing a lot more playing, and I want to start recording some of my stuff pretty soon. Now that I pretty much got all the other stuff I need. I just I need a 7-string. So anyway, what are maybe we can get the two of you to talk a little bit more about this. For those in our audience that are tuning in and hearing us kind of talking all this lingo, hearing things of like chorus and delay and phaser and distortion, what are some examples of maybe some different guitar players that model these traits really well, or maybe some specific bands, some specific artists? Maybe there's a particular song that showcases a great use of a tape delay or something like that. Maybe you guys.
I think I have like one, but I know I'm probably going to be using some terms incorrectly here. Probably one of the best examples I can give would be Andy Summers from The Police. Using reverb. I know he obviously used some chorus as well. Probably one of the best examples I can give of reverb would be Walking on the Moon.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Which is a great one because like there's tons of reverb in that because it's big and it's open. The tune is awesome. As far as other ones go, I mean, there's tons of examples of distortion. Oh God, and you could list off several hundred bands examples of that. I could probably say. I'm going to stop now before I start like just overgeneralizing. I'm sure I'll think of some others.
Well, it might be better to start a little bit more broader in general, and then we can maybe kind of go off into some more specific things.
Well, I think Danton, you said this, earlier as well, but having like the history of how distortion was discovered, you can really kind of read the history of rock music by these different eras of like different effects that were created for guitar as well. Which is an interesting point because as the guitar sounds evolve, so does the style of music that goes with it. Like obviously distortion, and like your sound effects, distortion, reverb, chorus would have been like a real big thing in the 1970s, of course, where a lot more of the music was riff driven than necessarily some of the more popular music in the 80s, where like guitar not necessarily took a back seat, but had to share the spotlight with synthesizers. So you start seeing a very big difference there in the sound.
That's where compression comes in.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what the heck is that? What is compression? How does that work?
Yeah. So like I said, I have a compressor at the beginning of my chain. You, Danton, and even you, Russ, too, might be able to better explain it. The way it was explained to me is that if you can picture a sound wave, you basically make the parts that are loud a little quieter, and you make the parts that are quieter a little louder. So it kind of evens everything out. And in practice, it makes everything easier to hear because it's all closer to the same level. So it cleans up the mix a little bit.
Yeah, so basically what you're talking about there is taking like the amplitude of the wave.
Hit the nail on the head.
I was going to say like what you're basically talking about there is taking like the amplitude of the wave itself, and God, I hope I'm using the right terms for this. The amplitude basically being like the actual like the loudness and the because like frequency has to do with the actual like number of hertz that determines what pitch you're playing. So amplitude is your volume, and by compressing it, basically what you're doing is you're taking and you're kind of equalizing everything as much. You're not completely, but you're right. It would make it easier to hear because you don't have as much variance in the amplitude of the wave itself. So that makes a lot of sense from what you're saying, that it makes it easier to hear. And
not to be confused with equalizers, where you can be a little bit more specific of what you do, like bringing up more of your higher frequencies with treble, more of your lower frequencies with bass. Compressor kind of works on a kind of broader scope with all of the sound, and it basically makes for a smaller window to work with.
Yeah, EQ and all that stuff is a totally different thing to talk about. Although,
Yeah, and I don't think that's even part of like a pedal board setup, right? There's
Oh
not
yeah,
like EQ pedals,
yeah,
are
you
there?
can run an
Oh, you
EQ pedal.
can.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, so like my amp, I actually, it's one of the things I want to get, but that's why I don't have one because I don't actually need it. My
oh,
my
okay.
orange head doesn't have like a 3-band EQ. It just so the clean channel just has bass and treble, and which is pretty,
Wow.
fine. And then the distorted channel just
Yeah.
has like a mid sweep switch.
Oh, that's really
Yeah,
weird because I
orange
mean,
amps are
almost
like
every
that.
amp I've ever
It's
seen.
weird.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of
They are
strange.
kind of weird. Yeah, they sound
Yeah,
great, but
that's
yeah,
yeah, like
they
you
are
don't
kind of
need
strange.
much. You don't need much. I think it sounds awesome, but when
Hmm.
I now started miking it to record stuff, and I'm tinkering with stuff a little more. I would like to have that control on the board as opposed to doing it on the computer where the sound's already been processed
Yeah,
a
we're
bunch of
making the sound
times.
first and then doctoring it later is
yeah,
always harder
basically,
than if you just have it all
Right.
built into your amp, then
If
you
you
really
start with the
know.
core, if your core is
basically started
good,
with an
your
analog
product will be
tool and
good.
then it's being digitized.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, because like
yeah,
once you actually put it through the digital process, you've taken it from being like an analog wave that you're actually modifying in real time to basically putting it through the digitization process that, it's the same thing when people have conversations about vinyl versus, CDs or all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can hear a difference. You can. But once it's hit that, that step of being through the computer, there is a difference, obviously. Um, I think the one thing about the EQ stuff that we were talking about is, and Dan, you even mentioned like a simple like a 3-band thing or something like that. Just
yeah.
for
Nick was
those who
talking
may
about
not
that.
know, or those who have heard the terms before, but bands, what you're talking about is actually different frequency ranges throughout the entirety of what you're playing, and that could be as low as like down in the, all the way down to like 100. 200 300 hertz, which is down way towards the bass range, and then like up towards the mid range all the way up to like 12,000, 15,000 hertz, which is like up at the very top range. Now I'm giving an extremely broad
We're like
range,
above
but
12th position on guitar for all you guitar players
right.
out
And,
there.
and the
Once
thing
you
of
get to
what you're
those
talking about there
frequencies.
is you're actually talking about completely modifying the tone by boosting other areas and dropping other areas out. Like for example, in a studio recording, you might have the lows and the highs boosted more versus the mids, whereas in a live recording or live performance, you would have the mids boosted more as well, so that it has a little bit more body to it.
And then there's always scooping the mids,
Yeah.
which is kind of a point of contention in like the rock and metal world of, like let's
Yeah.
have like
Yeah.
all of our crank on like bass and treble frequencies and then just dip out the mids entirely to create a really, really rough sound. And there are plenty of musicians out there that will swear against that of you should have a really nice good mid-range frequency to round it all out too.
Well,
And even just within equalization you have so many different schools of thought, just
Oh yeah.
like, putting your distortion through a pedal first, or doing it through the amp itself. It's one of those things where if you have the luxury, it definitely behooves one to experiment and tinker and explore the different possibilities, which kind of ties back to why a multi-pedal is nice, because you could try all the different levels of distortion out with like a nice little sample platter. The basics of using like a combination amplifier versus a standalone that you need to get like Nick's amp setup. You have your tube amp hooked up to a cabinet, right? The orange is the amp
right.
itself is a separate piece. But as for my Fender Deluxe 90, it's an all-in-one built-in thing. I can't separate the amp from the cabinet. It's all
Right.
one unit, and that has a different sound characteristic to it. I mean, again, mainly my most of my goals of gear acquisition were from a teacher's standpoint, because I primarily use guitar to teach private lessons. So the Deluxe 90 caught my eye because it has dual inputs. You could plug in 2 guitars at the same time. So I could have myself and the student both plugged in, and we're on the same volume and same, we're not fighting for who could hear who, and I have control over everyone's sound, and it makes for really nice, it has a really nice distortion channel on it. And then, like I said, combining it with the Boss multi-pedal, it's like a perfect surface level. Here's everything. And then if you want to get into the more specifics, you start to build your own board. But
Well, I think what Nick was talking about, especially, and even you were touching on a little bit there, Danton, is that like when you talk about a pedal board being a preference thing for each guitarist, you're really talking about like what degree of control you want to have over your sound and how
Mhm.
exact you want to get about it. And some people are very, very specific about the sounds they're going for. Even like you mentioned, the luxury of having the ability to actually control the final output with an EQ itself to basically like here's the sound I'm going to create, and here's the exact parameters of which I want to basically filter what I'm playing through. And you can get really, really specific with it if you really, really have a lot of money to burn.
Yeah. Or
It's
if
the
you're like,
musician's problem.
if you're lucky enough that you're close to like a really good reputable like big chain music store, you know, like Sam Ash Music or Guitar Center, and you can take your gear to a store and you could try out, like a lot of times music store employees are really, really approachable with like, hey, can I like plug my guitar into like X, Y, and Z amp, and or not, well, or amp to see what the amps sound like, or into X, Y, and Z pedal to see what these sort of pedals do before I make a purchase. And a lot of times you can, you know, there's a reason every time you go into Guitar Center, you hear like tons of customers just playing and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, because they're really sampling all the different levels of customization to the sound they can do, not just with the instrument itself, but with all of the means through which to attach it to an amplifier and, you know, and modify it.
Well, I think that makes a really good point too. And I think just from the perspective of somebody who's been outside of the guitar world, because
like going to the
I basically
library.
viewed it from the outside. Was this?
It's like going to the library.
It kind of is to some extent, but I mean, just from viewing it from the outside, viewing how guitarists handle like creating the sound and controlling it, excuse me, there is probably more of a greater degree of having to also find what kind of sound you want to create after the fact of just the instrument itself versus any other instrument you'll find out there. Like, you know, maybe you might have that for a keyboardist who is, you know, going to find like what kind of keyboard they like, as long as it has like the sounds and the ability to like modify what sounds they want, but that's all on the instrument itself. For drummers, a lot of us, it really comes down to, you know, when you're talking the actual drums, how many piece kit you're going to be working with, and what wood the drums are made out of, and how that affects the sound, and then obviously the cymbals as well. But like for guitar, it's like one layer on top of another with the instrument, the amp, the pedals. So there's a lot to really
then
do.
The mic that's receiving the stuff from the amp, and then
yeah,
all
exactly.
of the filters that's going through.
More so than you see with any other instrument, which is interesting to me because it's a world I'm not really terribly knowledgeable about or very much privy to, being that I don't play much guitar.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that can be important, and you know, the people that do have the money, the people that are touring, you know, playing stadium shows, they have the money to do it. It is important that they have that sort of customizability over their rig, and it's important that they get very specific with what they're trying to do, because they're playing huge shows, and it takes an entire team of people to put that show on. It's very easy if the sound guy knows what to expect. He's like, you know, we finally got this rig like dialed in.
The secret sauce of like, I know exactly what we're
now,
hearing.
you know, I can get everything set up pretty quickly, where, you know, it takes a lot of time though. You know, it could take a couple of years before you can actually
that's a whole different skill in its own right.
Yeah.
Aside from the playing and singing,
yeah, definitely.
And everything else. Yeah.
Definitely.
It's a very
but
mechanical
it's another
type
good,
of
yeah.
Yeah, it's making me miss live shows all the more to really get that.
It's been a really, really long time since I played a live show.
Yeah, same. Even
couple of years, I guess. Couple of years, not quite that long. I was playing with Carson and Kane, actually, for a little bit while I was in college. Yeah, while I was in college, I was lugging all my stuff from Westchester all the way out to Carson's house.
Yeah,
and,
like my whole I've been there with the rock teachers.
Jamming,
we had our little
for
thing.
A couple hours. Yeah.
Yeah,
it was worth it. It's totally worth it.
Yeah, especially like when you're playing with musicians that are like right on your same level of skill and creativity. It's just amazing what kind of things can be made in a session, you know. And I would just always religiously, like, the phone goes on silent, it goes in the corner of the room, I go into the voice memo app and just record the whole session and listen back to it on the way home. Was one of the nice things about having the long commute from West, because I was living at Westchester at the time, and then traveling over to Collegeville to, you know, to like meet with the other teachers and stuff after like coaching bands on weekends, and we would get together and go over into the dance studio and you know, borrow some floor space and set up all of our stuff and just jam for a couple hours. And it was awesome, but I really missed that. But yeah, and it's kind of cool to see like how, you know, in our case, we had like 3 different guitar players and then 2 different guitar setups. There was my setup and then another guitar player, and then there was another teacher who was also piano and guitar, and we would just trade back and forth. So he would like play my guitar stuff and I would play keys, and then I would play my guitar stuff and he would play keys. So we would kind of mix and match, but just like the differences between even just how my little guitar station was set up from this other guitar player, it was like looking at 2 completely different sets of instruments and the different sounds that it's like, oh yeah, that's me, that's him. You could really clearly hear it, even though it's just on an iPhone recording. And I think it all is
Yeah.
attributed to like he had a much more what's the word, thorough a setup of pedals that he connected, and he had like a whole thing that he built, and it hooks up to his amp, and it was the amp and the cabinet were separate, and it was this whole thing. And I just kind of had my, you know, my Fender Deluxe, and brought whatever guitar I wanted that particular week and just kind of rolled with it for fun because I didn't feel like carrying everything. So.
But you can still tell the difference on the iPhone recording though. I mean, it just goes to show that like you don't need all the gear to play guitar, you know.
Yeah.
You still need the technical skills to play. So, you know, that's important.
And that's a whole different debate, you know, and I don't even think we're even going to get into the whole, like, you know, the stereotype of guitar players who hide behind pedals and, you know, different sorts of sound modifiers. That's a whole different topic we can touch on. Maybe we can bring Nick back for another episode or get some other guitar players. You know, I know eventually we're going to get Carson back for some episodes. I don't know if you know this, Nick, but Carson's one of our teachers now for DocRocker. He teaches.
Yeah, I watched this episode and you guys were talking about that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So right now he's swamped with school, so he's missed the last couple of weeks with our podcast. But we'll have him back, and that'll be kind of fun. We can maybe get you back, and we could talk a little bit more about some other.
Yeah, I would love that.